Since 2015, LEGO Star Wars UCS sets have usually come with at least one extremely high quality exclusive minifigure to place on the stand alongside their sets. But I don't think LEGO fully understands exactly what to do with this figure, and I've had a few problems with the way they've gone about it over the past few years. So this video I'm going to talk about how I would handle these minifigures in general, before going back and fixing the minifigure selection in every UCS set over the past 10 or so years. But I want to start off with what I think is a pretty interesting question, which is, should UCS sets come with minifigures at all? Because there's an argument to be made that they really shouldn't. The point of UCS sets is that they're these massively detailed, display-focused and complicated models of Star Wars vehicles. Minifigures shouldn't add any value to these sets in the same way they would like a playset, so it follows that they shouldn't lose any value by not including the minifigures. All of these UCS sets behind me, I don't have the minifigure on display with them, and I don't think these are any less valuable than they would be if this is how they came by default. And I think if LEGO were to plan out the Star Wars catalogue from scratch, they probably wouldn't include minifigures in these UCS sets. They'd probably treat them more like the helmet collection or the midi scale collection, which is just the set itself, the display plaque, and like a stand, and that's it. The thing is though, LEGO have never done a Star Wars collectible minifigure series. So these UCS sets are kind of the only reliable, consistent way to get those really detailed, ultra high quality Star Wars minifigures. Plus, like, as a garnish, these minifigures really do look good on display. Like, they do complete the look of the set. And I don't think anyone would complain if they just suddenly started adding minifigures to the helmet collection or the midi scale collection sets. So yes, I do think UCS sets should come with minifigures, and LEGO apparently feels the same way, so good start. So if they're going to include them, how should LEGO handle these UCS minifigures? Like, what rules should they abide by to make sure that they do them properly and consistently? Well, the first thing I think they should do is actually clearly define what a UCS set is versus a Master Builder Series set, and just label them properly and consistently. Like, if you look at this list of UCS sets from like the past few years, there are quite a few of them that really clearly should be MBS sets. For this video, I'm not going to be talking about them. Like, they should just be treated as very large play sets with like 20 plus decent minifigures. The next thing I think they should do, the first like actual proper rule here, is that they should always include the pilot, driver, or commander of the ship with the set for the display plaque. This is something they've been consistently doing, even in the like massive capital ships like the Venator or the UCS Star Destroyer. But it's also something they infamously fucked up really badly with the Republic gunship when they threw in this generic Phase 1 clone trooper and told us to just like eat shit and pretend that it's the pilot. That was a bad move. Let's not let that happen again. Rule number 3 here is that I think every minifigure included in a UCS set should be made to the absolute highest possible quality. Now that sounds really obvious to say, so like more specifically, if the character would benefit from arm printing, they get arm printing. If they have like sleeves, they get dual molded arms. And if they're wearing boots especially, they should get dual molded legs. Like I said before, LEGO doesn't do CMF Star Wars minifigures, so this is like their only actual opportunity to flex their abilities to make a properly good minifigure. So they shouldn't waste it or compromise in any way, especially considering that these are like the most expensive sets that they sell. Now this is also something they have been doing consistently over the years. You see what are normally like boring, generic pilot figures for like X-Wings, TIE Fighters, or AT-STs, get arm printing that they never would have gotten in an equivalent playset. But this is also something that they don't follow through with all the time, like with young Boba Fett, Han Solo again, and especially the C-3POs in the Death Star and the Sail Barge set, which have no excuse to not have the dual molded silver leg. For the next rule, I think if there is a minifigure of a character, that should not be exclusive to the UCS set. That's not the same as to say that there shouldn't be exclusive minifigures. This is just me saying that if there is one version of a character, that minifigure should not be locked behind a multi-100 € paywall for a display-only UCS set. LEGO should endeavour to include a version of every popular named character in a reasonably accessible, cheaper playset for any kids like that who just want to play with it. But for the final rule, I do think UCS sets should come with special exclusive minifigures, but I think the thing that makes these minifigures exclusive should be the printing, not that they're like the only version of the character. Now again, this doesn't necessarily mean that these figures should be higher quality than like their playset equivalent, but there should be something exclusive and special to these UCS figures that collectors can point to and say, this is why this minifigure is special. Because I think having that kind of thing in a collector's hobby like this is a really important and I think fun aspect of it. I really like the idea of like the exclusive sand printing on the Mace Windu in the Republic gunship, for example, or like the face mask mask printing on Han and Leia from the Millennium Falcon. And with these ground rules established, here's how I would have handled the minifigures in every UCS set since 2014. For the Mandalorian Xenon Starfighter, I do think Din was absolutely done to UCS quality with like the printed arms and everything, but he's always been UCS quality. Like since they started making this figure with printed arms, you could have just thrown him into any UCS set and he would have fit. And as a result, this minifigure doesn't actually have any exclusive parts whatsoever, which means he isn't actually special in any way, so that's what I would fix here. I'd just throw in like extra props, like maybe throw in a jetpack so he can put it over his cape like he has in the show, and like I did with my minifigure here, or even just giving him like some kind of exclusive face print, or like some maybe battle damage on his Beskar armor or something. Just anything to make this figure a bit more interesting. The Grogu that came in the set was fine. I like the new mold for what it's worth, but it's not exclusive to the set, so it's whatever. Jango Fett is perfect in the UCS Slave 1 with like the printed arms and everything, but that young Boba Fett absolutely should have had dual molded legs. Not just for the sake of accuracy, but just to make him a bit more special compared to the playset version of the same character. That's among the countless other problems that this minifigure has, but whatever. The AT-ST driver should have had dual molded legs just to represent those boots, but was otherwise handled fairly well with that printed arm to just distinguish him from the Endor playset version. The UCS Death Star has so many minifigure related problems that I actually made a dedicated video about it, talking about all of them. But even at that, I just don't think this set should have counted as a UCS set to begin with. I think this is clearly a Master Builder Series set, so that's just what I would have done. The TIE Interceptor was perfect. S tier, no notes. Actually, fuck it, let's just put all these in a tier list. TIE Interceptor is S tier, Death Star shouldn't count, AT-ST is A tier, Jango C tier, N1 probably A tier. Jabba's sail barge is really interesting because the way you'd go about fixing it kind of depends entirely on whether you see this as like an expanded UCS set or a downgraded MBS set. If you see this as a UCS set, which you probably should because it's clearly not meant for play, then it's disgraceful that this set comes with 7 characters that are exclusive to this €500 set. Especially that Jabba the Hutt, Slave Leia, and I guess Bib Fortuna minifigure. A version of these characters should have come in an €120 to €150 downscaled playset version of the barge, or at least in that like rumored diorama collection set that was supposed to come out a few years ago. Also, if we're just like applying UCS standards to these figures, then that Princess Leia should have had side leg printing to like properly reflect that red skirt thing she has going on. Salacious B. Crumb should have had pupils in his eyes. I don't care what people say about that. And the C-3PO absolutely should have been the version with a dual molded silver leg. Honestly, if you're asking me to redesign this as a UCS set from scratch, I'd have made it like €100 cheaper and only include Jabba the Hutt as like the display plaque figure, and that's it. Like all of these other minifigures should have come in a downscaled playset version instead. Or if you want to just like rebrand it into an MBS set, then you could keep it at the same price, but you would definitely have to throw in that Desert Skiff and Sarlacc pit set with all of those figures as well. Like if you see this as like the box, then the value proposition here is actually quite good. Like this looks like a really complete set, I think. But the way they actually did it with this like super overpriced UCS set and an even more overpriced UCS like DLC set, all the while locking all of these like insanely sought after minifigures behind a crazy paywall, that's about as bad as it gets. F tier for sure. The UCS X-Wing was basically perfect in the way that they handled the minifigures there, but I much preferred the like dual molded helmet that came with the X-Wing playset in 2018, and I don't think I'll ever die happy knowing that they fumbled it so badly by reverting that change. Especially in this super upscale display set where the helmet won't fit in the cockpit excuse isn't even relevant. So yeah, if it was me, I would have 100% included that helmet instead, just to make this the ultimate version of the Luke Skywalker X-Wing pilot minifigure, like I did with my minifigure here, which I really like. They just give him full arm printing here and dual molded printed legs, which is about as good as it gets in terms of LEGO minifigures, so I'd for sure give this S tier, even though I do want to give it A tier just because of my personal preference for the helmet. Rex in the UCS Venator was definitely UCS quality, but it coming out in the Microfighter after the fact, completely unchanged, really did devalue this figure for me. Like I said before, there's no point in just like arbitrarily downgrading this figure out of spite to make this one look better, but I do think it should have had some kind of exclusive printing, whether that be in the form of just like that plaster piece on his face, or just some like oil and dirt stains on his torso, or like the tally marks on his chest, as a reference to the 2013 one, which the collectors who really liked this figure when it first came out especially would really appreciate. I definitely think it needed something to distinguish it from the microfighter anyway. Yularen is fine, it's good that he got dual molded legs, but this character should not be exclusive to this UCS Venator. It's not the biggest deal in the world because I don't think there's this like massive crowd of kids desperate to play with an Admiral Wolf Yularen minifigure, but it's like the principle, you know? Overall, I'd put it at A tier just because in terms of like the exclusivity idea of UCS figures, they kind of screwed it up in two distinct but equally bad ways. I really don't fuck with the way they handled the minifigures in the UCS Razor Crest. The Season 1 Din was absolutely perfect. Like, it was an ultra high quality exclusive version of a minifigure that you could otherwise obtain pretty easily in some cheaper playsets. Absolutely perfect. This is exactly how they should handle UCS figures. Grogu is whatever, who cares? But it's the Queel and the Mithril minifigures that I really have a problem with, because if you wanted a version of these characters, you had to spend €600 on this UCS set, and that's just not right. So I'd have just not included them in the set at all, and instead just throw them into like the cheaper playset version of the same ship. But the way they actually did it, I'd probably put it at C tier. Luke's Landspeeder was absolutely perfect in terms of his figures. Luke was kind of whatever in the sense that there really wasn't much you could do with him. But this version of C-3PO was absolutely perfect. It was the first time that they gave him that dual molded silver leg, which is crazy if you think about it. Like, he really should have had that from the beginning. They also gave him full arm printing as well, which means this version of C-3PO was and still is the perfect C-3PO. Like, it is the ultimate minifigure of that character, which is exactly the kind of standard that you should be including in UCS sets. It's kind of the standard you should be including in all sets, but especially UCS sets. So yeah, the minifigures in this set are S tier for sure, even if you could do Luke better nowadays, and he was a bit boring in this set. The Republic Gunship, I think, was easily the worst modern UCS set ever made in terms of minifigure selection and quality. Like, this yellow Phase 1 Clone Trooper is genuinely as bad as it gets. It's not exclusive, it's not unique or special or high quality in any way. This absolutely should have been a Phase 1 Clone Trooper pilot, just to continue that trend of always including the pilot and actually having the minifigure relate to the set in a way that is like unique and actually interesting. Them saying that this generic clone trooper could double up as the pilot was such an outrageous excuse cop-out for them to make at the time. Also, just to make this figure different than the V19 Torrent one, he absolutely should have come with arm printing as well. Something similar to like this from Republic Custom Store on Instagram, or even just like the General Kenobi minifigure that came out a few years later. Mace Windu here is better. I do like that exclusive sand printing on his torso, but that alone is nowhere near special, interesting, or high quality enough to justify this UCS figure. Like, the Mace Windu that came with the Republic fighter tank a year later was way better in terms of quality. This figure 100% should have had dual molded legs to represent those boots, which honestly probably would have been enough on its own, but he also should have had some kind of unique face print as well, instead of just copy and pasting that exact same one for the fighter tank set the year later. That combined with like the sand printing on his torso would have made this a UCS quality minifigure to me, but how they actually handled him and the clone trooper in this set, F tier, for sure. It doesn't get worse than this. The AT-AT was interesting in the sense that this is kind of how the UCS Jabba sail barge should have been done. The X-Wing pilot Luke is disappointingly plain, especially when you compare it to like the UCS X-Wing version of him, with those like unprinted arms, inferior helmet set, and those non-dual molded legs. Like, he is extremely boring. They gave General Veers dual molded legs, so that's nice, you know, that's something. And he was available in the cheaper AT-AT playset, which was available around the same time. Like, in that sense, he was handled pretty perfectly. They decided to throw in a bunch of like AT-AT drivers and snowtroopers as well, which I liked. It felt like a nice extra bonus to fill out the set, because they were available in the cheaper AT-AT playset and battle packs at the same time. The AT-AT drivers could have and probably should have had dual molded legs too, if you look at like these references, even just like as a way to make them distinct and a bit more special than the playset versions of them, as well as obviously upgrading Luke to be like the standard that you see in the UCS X-Wing. There is another world where this set does something similar to like the Star Destroyer or the Venator, and it like only comes with Veers and like one AT-AT driver, maybe a higher quality Luke too. That honestly probably would have been better, and that's probably what I would have done. But the approach they actually went with, I'm fine with too, so I'd probably put it at B tier. The A-Wing pilot was just not good enough. Definitely should have had dual molded legs at least, just to distinguish it over just like a regular playset version. LEGO really just did like the absolute bare minimum for this character, so I put it at like D tier. The figures in the Imperial Star Destroyer were almost perfect. The only fault I see with this is that that crew member probably should have had dual molded legs as well, but even at that I do think this still comfortably sits at like the bottom of S tier. Like, this was very good. The Y-Wing pilot, like the A-Wing pilot, again was just not good enough. Like, this was just the bare minimum. It was just not high quality or interesting enough. Like, it didn't have any printed arms. It still had that inferior non-dual molded helmet design, even though the new one came out in the same year. It had no dual molded legs. It had nothing interesting going on at all. So I'd put it at like the bottom of E tier. We've now reached the 2017 UCS sets, and it's worth mentioning here that the standards of minifigure you can expect from this point on maybe drops a bit. Dual molded legs were only used on standard minifigures for the first time in 2015, which should cover every set that I'm looking at in this video, but they only appeared on LEGO Star Wars minifigures for the first time in 2018 with that Han Solo. I do still think it's worth criticizing LEGO for not including them in their most expensive sets at the time when the technology did exist, but it is just worth mentioning in advance because from that perspective you could say that criticism from this point on is a bit harsher. The Snowspeeders figures, despite having full arm printing where the Y-Wing didn't, still aren't perfect. You could criticize them for not having the dual molded helmet, but they also have these like copy and pasted face prints which just don't look good beside each other, and that is something that they very easily could have avoided. And neither of them have dual molded legs. As I said, you know, whether you expect that or not from them, the technology did exist and it could have. By modern standards, they would have ideally come with that like dual molded helmet in black and white versions. Unique face prints, at least compared to each other, and dual molded legs would have been perfect, but again, they couldn't time travel, so I can't really blame them too hard. So even though they did give them arm printing, I think the best I could do is still probably B tier. I kind of like what they did with the Millennium Falcon here. Only 2 of these minifigures were exclusive in any way to this UCS set, and those were the Han and Leia minifigures with the, like, breathing face mask things, which is exactly the kind of detail that I want LEGO to include to make these figures, like, rare or interesting. So that's good. Like, there isn't a single character that's, like, paywalled behind an €850 set. But I think the quality of these minifigures leaves a lot to be desired. After looking at some reference images, Leia again should have had dual molded legs. Han should have had the dual molded legs they gave him in the Betrayal at Cloud City set a year later. C-3PO absolutely should have had that dual molded silver leg, which granted, okay, they hadn't actually made at the time, but like they absolutely could have. And arm printing while we're at it, just to make him the ultimate version of C-3PO like they did in the Landspeeder many years later. But I think it's Rey here that's really interesting because, especially for a UCS minifigure, she is really under-detailed and kind of inaccurate. They should have given her some printing on her arms for like her shoulder and like that bandage texture wrap like they did with Ahsoka many years later. And she probably should have had dual molded legs as well for like her boots with some like light nougat printing above her, just like on the shins under where the cloth drapes down over her legs. And I think these changes would have turned what is normally a very boring and very like common minifigure into something that is actually UCS quality and like interesting enough to be sought after. And the rest of the figures in the set are fine. I don't think there's any other details that you can realistically want them to add, so it's whatever. So in the end, I'd probably give it D tier. We can rapid fire the next two with like this Assault on Hoth and Death Star sets because they're clearly supposed to be MBS sets. Like if the classification did exist at the time, then these would very clearly fall under it. So that's what I would have done here. Like there's no point in applying these rules to the 42 minifigures or something that came with both these sets. The first UCS Slave 1 came with this version of Boba Fett with like arm printing and that like pauldron piece, which I still think is the best version of Boba Fett they've ever put out 11 years later. And what's more is that even though they included basically the exact same figure in the Betrayal at Cloud City set a few years later, they kept the face print exclusive to the set, which is exactly the kind of approach to exclusivity that I want to see in these UCS sets. The Bespin Guard was a good inclusion in the sense that there is another version of him that showed up in the advent calendar, so there's no like paywall here to deal with. Again, this character should have had dual molded legs because that's just clearly a part of the design, but you know, precedent, no other characters had dual molded legs at the time, so And it's a similar story with Han Solo here, technically exclusive to the set because of just like minor printing differences, and this version of Han was available in a lot more accessible playsets as well, so there's no issues there. But again, this minifigure should have been made more special. Like, I hate seeing these unprinted, bland legs like this. Like, even if they just made them dual molded or something, that would have been something. If they took the exact leg pieces out of the MBS set a few years later and included them here as well, then that would have been ideal. But just like anything would have been better. Like, it definitely needed something to make it more interesting to me. And the Stormtrooper's like, whatever, who cares? Me personally, I would have only included this Boba Fett in the set. I think it would have been cleaner, I think it would have been more consistent, but instead you included all of these like simple, underwhelming characters that all they really do is age the set. I'd probably still put it at A tier though, because really, for the time especially, you were only 2 dual molded legs away from being pretty good. For the 2015 TIE Fighter, I think they absolutely nailed it with this figure. Pilot of the ship, exclusive to this set but not locked behind a paywall, and a higher quality than usual with like the arm printing. This is S tier, it is the absolute perfect example of how to do it. And finally, we'll finish with the 2014 Sandcrawler, which I consider to be the first like modern UCS set. And maybe understandably, I think it gets the minifigures completely wrong here. This version of Luke with the like uncomfortably detailed face probably shouldn't have existed anyway, but if it did, it should have been exclusive to the set just to make it interesting in some way. But it also came completely unchanged in this Mos Eisley Cantina playset and also an advent calendar in the same year, so this UCS version has absolutely nothing special going for it. C-3PO again should have had the dual molded silver leg, but like this is really pushing it. Like dual molded legs didn't even exist at this time, so you know I'll give them a pass here. And the Jawas came in battle packs, and they're kind of just fodder anyway, so like that's fine. They don't need to be ultra high quality or anything. But Owen Lars, I have a massive problem with, because to this day this is the only set LEGO have ever made to include a modern minifigure version of that character. The only other time they ever made him was in like a 2005 Sandcrawler set, which was too simple to really be like in this discussion. This is why I care so much about characters being locked behind either like limited time events or these massive display set paywalls. Overall, I'd probably put it D tier because again, Uncle Owen isn't as important as a character as like Jabba is, for example. Every set older than this I'm not going to cover because they're clearly either MBS sets, repeats of sets I've already covered, didn't come with any minifigures at all, are too old to really take seriously as a model, or just came from a time where the minifigures were so simple that like the idea of an ultra high quality one was just kind of foreign. I don't think I've heard anyone else give these exact opinions, so I'm curious where others land on this. Thanks very much for watching, and farewell.